Hey everyone, I'm Brian and welcome to Figure Drawing Fundamentals. First up, we're going to be talking about gesture. And gesture is super important. I mean, it's kind of the underlying, not structure, but the underlying thing that kind of helps glue the entire pose together, you know? So we really need to kind of get into gesture and figure out how it relates to the figure as a whole. And just know that there's a lot of overlap kind of between all these fundamental classes, you know. So I know we talked about gesture in the quick sketch fundamentals and we went pretty extensively into it there. We'll go almost more like an overview and just do some kind of quicker versions of what we did in the quick sketch fundamentals. And I highly recommend people go take a look at that and, you know, study kind of how I went through and did the gesture over there. But real quick, before we get into drawing, I mean, I just want to point out on a few of these drawings that I did this last term, kind of why the gesture is important and why it's, you know, important to focus on that as much as possible. I mean, if you just look at this on a lot of it, you can see kind of the sweep of this center line. We can see kind of this sweeping line underneath the contour, kind of those lighter lines running underneath there. And that's kind of helping place the arm and make sure the width of the arm and length is correct. You know, gesture is used for that, but then it's also used to kind of build off of, you know, like if we look at this leg down here, we can see the gesture kind of ran across the top and then sweep it down this way. And then we kind of built off of that gesture and added to it or cut into it, one or the other. And it kind of helps lock everything together. You know, so the gesture kind of supports the structure that's built on top of it. You know, like the boxy shape of the hip right in here was built off of the kind of more gestural, larger shape of the torso that I started with. So, I mean, we can go through and look at a couple of these real quick. Like if you look at this guy, he's a pretty good example. If we look at just this arm, like it has a much more exaggerated contour to it because he has like a pretty bulky arm, but the gesture underneath it is really kind of what was helping line up some of these underlying forms in terms of the bone. And so a lot of these like sweeping lines that I put in initially are kind of helping lock these forms together, you know, in terms of between this shoulder and this little section, they visually line up, even though the contour itself kind of deviates from that and gets added on top of it a bit. And then it's, you know, as we build that structure on top of the gesture, it's going to help push overlaps in certain areas, you know, as long as we know the anatomy. And it's going to really help kind of, I don't know, make things more interesting to look at a level of complexity that, you know, you might not get otherwise. Again, the legs are a great example. If you look down here, I mean, you can see that gesture sweep that I put in for the bone. And visually, this line, this part of the contour here, and this part of the contour down here line up, and they're going to help you move your eye throughout the drawing, even though the actual contour is coming out here at the calf and out and back down that way, you know. And so same thing down in here. And you can find that kind of all over, like this kind of lines up with this, and then that kind of gets added onto it. So that's one of the reasons that gesture is super important. The other is it kind of helps find just the overall flow of the pose, you know, because gesture can be exaggerated quite a bit. And so as you work on a drawing more and more, it'll kind of get tighter and tighter. And so you want the gesture to start out really rhythmical and flowing and even exaggerate things here and there, knowing that as you kind of work, things are going to tighten up and get a little more rigid and a little more, I don't know, less fluid, you know, so starting out more fluid and more gestural can be helpful. Same thing on here, you know, I mean, it started out with that nice sweeping center line and some really nice kind of sweeping lines for the torso, and then went and kind of built that structure on top of there. You know, I mean, we could even see that initial gesture line I put in for the forearm, and then that kind of muscular kind of flexor section ends up draping off of that line. You know, the same thing, we have kind of this sweeping line I put in here, and then this stuff kind of gets added onto it. So it's pretty important, you know, this little overlap in here is kind of determined part through anatomy and part through gesture, and then those kind of underlying structural forms. So there's not too many of these. I mean, we'll just look at one more. And again, this leg is a good example, and arm, you know, and we can see kind of that, you know, this little section visually lines up with this section right in here. And then structurally, we went and just added a couple of components onto there. So the gesture was used to establish essentially the width of the wrist and kind of lower forearm, and the width of the upper arm, the width of the elbow, you know, the width of the knee, and the width of the ankle, and the length of those things also. And then just kind of find the movement between those main points, and then structurally we can go back and add to them. So knowing that that's as important as it is, we're going to go ahead and go in and start doing, you know, a few of our own gesture drawings so we can figure out how to apply this to some reference. And then I'll show a couple different ways to do it. Most of these, because as we get later into the term, I usually typically start drawing a little less of the Riley 2 triangle torsos, and I'll usually kind of build a little more piece to piece, you know, go shoulder and chest, and then sort of add rib cage, and then add the pelvic section onto there, which you can see pretty clearly on most of the ones I just showed, and this one as well. It has, I'm trying to think, I think I did kind of do the triangles on that one. This one you can see pretty clearly. I start with the head, work my way down to the shoulders, added kind of the chest and breast section, and then just went in and found this sweep for the rib cage that sat right in here, and then came and added that pelvic section onto it, you know. And then the other way is kind of the more Riley way, where I would have gone in and found more of those two triangles that oppose each other and create that hourglass type shape. You know, so either way is okay. I don't know exactly why I choose to do one or the other a lot of the time. It's just kind of not really what mood I'm in, but it depends on the pose and what I think will best fit, you know, whatever goal it is that I'm trying to accomplish with that drawing. So we can come through. I mean, this one you can see I did initially that little bit of that Riley triangle in there, but then didn't really do, no, actually I did do the second one. So that one was more Riley. And I think these later ones, yeah, this one doesn't have the two triangles. It was just head, neck, shoulder, and then I added rhythm for the rib cage, and then added this boxier section on for the hip, you know. So you don't have to get caught up in those triangles. They do help to lock torsos together with a nice rhythmical flow from certain angles, and then others it can be more advantageous to stick more with kind of the rib cage and box type idea. I think this is another one that, yeah, this is one that was kind of less Riley and more really focusing on getting that head, neck, and shoulder section locked down, and then adding that nice rhythmical rib cage, you know, or at least the bottom of it, the bottom half of that oval, knowing that's going to go down to about belly button level, and then come in and locking that pelvic section up onto it. So I'm going to show both of those, you know, like I'll go through and just side by side, I'll say, here's, you know, kind of the Riley version of this torso, and then here's the kind of non-Riley version and how I would do both. So I'm going to go ahead and get started.